Hey there, Mr. Bill here, and today I'm going to show you how to check your sub levels quickly. I remember Multiplier put a tutorial out a while ago, and his solution for how to check your sub was to put an EQ8 on your master and just to put a shelf like this and then set a key command like so to just turn this on and off just so you can hear the subs separately. For instance, this is what it would sound like when I didn't have my sub checker turned on. And then this is what it would sound like with my sub checker turned on. That doesn't really tell me anything. It doesn't tell me how loud my subs are, and it doesn't, I mean, it kind of does on the spectrometer, I suppose, or the spectrograph on the EQ. But but it doesn't really tell me, like, relative to anything else, how loud the subs are. It doesn't really help too much. So the way that I've been doing it, and I'll credit this trick to No Manner, because I was doing a collab with him recently, and I saw that he had Spectrum on the master, and I've never really used Spectrum for much, but I originally noticed, or I almost immediately noticed, that the only thing that I could see spiking on the Spectrum was the low frequencies, and you can see that happening in my tune here right now. So if I press play, it looks like this. You could just see this one peak down here at around the 45 Hertz region. And the way that that's happening is when you load up Spectrum, and I actually just have my Spectrum set to default this way, you have a range control, so you have an auto control, and I think for the most part this auto control is how it loads initially when you just have Ableton installed for the first time. And this auto control just seems super useless. I have no idea why it exists, but basically what happens is when you play, it just kind of like switches the range here on the side, this decibel range, to try and just sort of figure out how to fill everything. I mean, I guess it's fine if you just want to see everything from the lowest lows to the highest highs and have the graph sort of changing constantly. But I'm not really interested in almost anything else other than the subs, really. Especially if you're working on headphones, this is a super good trick. So what you need to do is hit this range button on the spectrometer, and then you set your highest and your lowest ranges. So your highest range should be maybe 1 decibel. 1 or 0, which is basically the top of the range. Like if you're going any higher than 0, you're clipping. And then the second parameter here is like the lowest point that you want to measure. So if you have this set to like 40, you're now measuring your anything from 0 hertz to 20 kilohertz, basically between 0 dB and negative 40 dB. But that's still not really telling us too much. So if you just keep hitting your up arrow on this second parameter, you can get it to a point where you're just looking at maybe like 8 dB or 9 dB of resolution, and that's kind of what you want, because all that's peaking at like this loud in the whole spectrum is pretty much your low frequencies. And then you can kind of just hover your mouse over it, and in this bottom left hand corner here it tells you exactly how loud that is. So if I put my mouse over this, you can see that my sub is peaking at about -2. And if you put in like any track that you really like the mix down of, or you think sounds super fat, you could probably figure out pretty quickly why it's sounding super fat, and it's generally probably because your sub isn't as loud as theirs. And this happened with a friend of mine recently. He was like, oh, how do I get my track to sound like this RL grime track? And I put a Spectrum on the RL grime track and a Spectrum on his track, and he just had to turn his sub up by like 8 dB, and then as soon as he turned it up, it sounded just as fat pretty much. So yeah, it's just a quick tip for using Spectrum in a nice way to measure your sub. I just always leave this on my master channel now, and I always have it after my limiter. If you have it before your limiter, you'll see that it's kind of relative to the entire volume of the track, and then you'll have to pick another arbitrary number, I guess. But it's easier to put after your limiter, because that way you can reference it against other mastered tracks, whereas unless you have the other people's pre-mastered tracks, you can't really see where their subs were sitting before mastering. Yet if you put it after your limiter, you can see where your sub is sitting technically after mastering and where theirs is sitting after mastering, given that their track is mastered probably. So yeah, it's just a nice way to check. So yeah, when you're playing it, it should just look like this. And this is good for checking between sections too. For instance, this whole section uses this one sub, but if I go to this section over here and check the sub here, you can see that's about the same. You can see this sub here is slightly quieter, so I can maybe turn this sub up by 1 dB or something like that. And it's just a good way, like if you're using lots of different sub channels throughout your tune, to quickly just check that they're all about the same level, so you know one section isn't drastically less subby than another, and when you go to play on a big sound system or something, one section bangs really hard and another section doesn't. So yeah, that's basically the trick. Have a good day.